My mother and father were killed in a terrible car accident when I was 6 years old. Since then, I have been raised by my aunt and uncle in Texas, along with my older cousin. It took me a while to adjust to this new arrangement, but in time, I came to accept my aunt and uncle as parental figures. But the person I was closest with was my cousin Lacey, but we were more like brother and sister. Living in Texas, we often went hunting and fishing. My uncle taught us both to be expert marksmen when it came to hog hunting. This comes in handy in southern United States, where these wild pigs are considered pests due to their effect on the ecosystem. By the time I was 13, I had become a terrific shooter. My uncle sometimes joked that I would become a police sniper. Over time, my cousin and I both developed an interest in computers. This was in the late 90s and early 2000s when the internet was a much newer phenomenon, and the idea of an information superhighway was very fascinating to both of us. Lacey is 2 years older than me and thus graduated high school sooner. She was accepted into the University of Texas with a scholarship in computer sciences. As for me, my initial enthusiasm in computers has since waned into casual interest. My ultimate passion was in sports journalism, and I would end up attending the University of Southern California with a scholarship in that field. In the summer of 2006, I finished my sophomore year, while Lucy had graduated from college and was now working for a large technical firm in Houston. It was summer break, and I hadn't seen her in a while, so I flew into town to visit for a few days. After spending a couple hours catching up, she brought up a subject that has since come back to haunt me. She referred to it as the dark web. One of her coworkers had been bragging about spending time there, claiming to have purchased drugs on numerous occasions, and also watching some very hardcore videos that could not be found anywhere on the regular internet. Lacey learned that this part of the web could only be accessed if you were a really good hacker. This predated Tor software by several years. Hacking had become a hobby of hers, and she decided to check it out. I figured, what the hell, right? What could be so bad about this dark web? Well, plenty, as it would turn out. As we went browsing, we both lost count of how many hitman advertisements, drug dealers, and animal torture videos we saw. Some videos were live streams of what seemed to be genuine rapes, which caused both of us to cringe. We even saw things like crush porn. Apparently, there are people out there who are sexually aroused by the sight of baby animals being crushed under stiletto heels. Despite all these horrors, Lacey had a strange fascination with this place, but I had already lost interest. Eventually, she came across a link titled TJ's Horror Shop. It sounded corny as hell, but Lucy clicked on it anyway. She was greeted by a message informing her that a show was going to be taking place that night, but that it was, quote, members only, end quote. The page gave her the option of registering, and she did just that. Southern Nerd 04 was the username she chose, if I remember correctly, and the website accepted her registration. She seemed eager to see what this was all about, but I felt very uneasy. From what I had seen so far, these people on the dark web are the type who hide their true colors, and I didn't want to see Lacey associating with people like that. After her registration went through, we were greeted by a digital clock, gradually counting down to the beginning of the live stream. It felt like an eternity. The clock eventually reached 0, and the screen lit up. We saw a man wearing a skull mask, skeleton gloves, and dressed in leather. He was twiddling his fingers like Mr. Burns, and we heard him speak in a deep, distorted voice.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to TJ's Horror Shop. For all the newcomers, it is my pleasure to welcome you into my house of horrors.
It seemed like a silly little show, but given everything else we had seen on the dark web, I wasn't convinced that something truly sinister was out of the question.
Tonight's first victim.
2 other men who were also wearing masks and dressed in leather dragged a third person in front of the camera. His hands were tied behind his back, and there was a bag over his head, like he was some kind of hostage.
Andrew Fleming of Charlotte, North Carolina, 43 years old, divorced, father of a son and daughter. He has been selected as the first victim of tonight's bloodbath.
I began feeling sick to my stomach, and I noticed Lacey was beginning to look nervous.
For those of you who are new, my viewers are the ones who get to pick how our victims meet their demise. Your username is selected at random, After your name is chosen, a box will appear on your screen to offer you several choices. The option you select is the method in which this poor bastard will die.
One of the henchmen ripped the bag off the hostage's head. The man was sobbing in terror and was pathetically begging for his life. I sincerely hoped this was all just an act, but I was becoming more and more convinced otherwise.
Now, let the selection process begin.
On the left side of the screen, all the usernames of those watching began to briefly flash up at random. Some kind of algorithm was using some sort of lottery system to select who would determine this man's fate. Eventually, it settled on the username Who Gives a Shit 771.
Who Gives a Shit 771? One of our favorite guests.
TJ shouted in glee.
How will Mr. Fleming's life come to a horrifying end? Let's find out.
A box appeared, showing the following options. A. Strangulation. B. Mutilation by chainsaw. C. Repeated gunshots. The user chose the third option.
Very well. Let the carnage begin.
One of the masked henchmen appeared from off-screen armed with a sawed-off shotgun. He aimed at the man's genitalia and fired. Lacey and I both gasped in shock and horror while Mr. Fleming howled in extreme agony. The henchman lifted the man up and shot him in both kneecaps, causing him to drop back down to the floor and continue begging for mercy, his pleas falling on deaf ears. The henchman then took out a 9mm pistol and emptied the entire clip into his back. I couldn't bear to watch anymore. I looked away from the computer and lost my lunch. I heard one more gunshot and the man's screaming stopped.
What a delightfully gruesome display. Now, on to our next guest.
The other guys dragged another hostage into view, also bound with a bag over their head. The bag was removed to reveal a young woman not much older than me.
Melissa Cartwright of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. 24 years old and single. You will be our next victim. Now, let's see who decides your fate.
As before, the slot on the left of our screen began flashing usernames at random. Much to our horror, it settled on the username Lacey had chosen. Tears began welling up in her eyes. "Lacey, shut this damn thing off!" I shouted.
Southern Nerd 04, a newcomer. We're happy to welcome you into our gruesome family. Now, you must choose how Miss Cartwright dies.
The small box reappeared, but with several different options than before. Flaying, electrocution, or incineration. Lacey sat frozen. "Lacey, get off this page now!" I said with a mixture of fear and anger. Several minutes passed and TJ had grown impatient.
Well, Southern Nerd, we are waiting.
Lacey began frantically pressing buttons, hoping to escape from this awful place.
If you don't choose in the next 20 seconds, you will be on our next show,
TJ said menacingly. For a moment, Lacey appeared to be considering one of the murder options, but before she could choose, I ripped the power cord from its outlet and shut the damn computer off. Lacey broke down sobbing while I rushed over to comfort her.
You don't think they'll find me, do you?
She said fearfully. I don't know. I stayed with Lacey for a few more days before flying back to Los Angeles. To be honest, I wanted classes to resume, but it was the middle of July. The whole situation with those wackos on the dark web appeared to have blown over. Or so I thought. Wednesday, July 19, 2006, 10:47 p.m. I returned to my apartment and flopped down on my bed. I opened up my laptop and was met with a horrifying sight. My generic desktop background had been replaced with an image of a skull mask, the same type of mask worn by TJ and his cronies in that terrible live stream. A video box appeared and a message began to play.
Hello there, Jason. It's me, TJ.
Shivers went down my spine. How did he learn my name? How the fuck did he hack into my laptop?
I believe we have a hostage here that might be of interest to you.
The camera angle changed. No, it can't be. Lacey. She was bound and gagged and sobbing in the corner of the room where TJ was filming. There were cuts and bruises on her face.
Remember when I told your cousin here that she would be a part of our next show? I'm a man of my word, Jason. She had a choice and she refused to answer the call. And now you will pay the ultimate price.
He bent down and pet her hair very creepily.
Or will she?
I sat motionless, waiting to hear what he would say next.
I've decided to make things interesting for our next show. Your cousin will have a chance to survive if, and only if, you eliminate this man.
A photograph of a middle-aged man appeared on my screen. Raymond Marshall, 53 years old, of Los Angeles, California.
No particular reason why I chose this random person, except for the fact he happens to live near you. And now you have a simple choice. Will you murder one person to potentially save another?
I stared at my laptop, unable to move or speak. I wanted to save Lucy, but was it worth murdering another innocent person?
20 seconds, Jason. Tick, tock, tick, tock.
I heard TJ taunting. Not much time to consider things. A very awful predicament to be in. TJ began to count out loud.
10, 9, 8, 7.
Yes, I will do it. I finally managed to force out. I regretted it almost instantly.
So, you've agreed to play along. Very well then. You have until the end of our show tonight to carry this out, which will be in a couple hours. Be warned, one of my henchmen is currently in Los Angeles, and he's watching your every move. You know, in case you try to chicken out. Oh, and we are also monitoring your communications, so don't even think about warning your target or calling the police.
I was trapped. There was no way out of this. I would have to become a murderer if Lacey was going to live, and the thought of it sickened me.
If you haven't eliminated your target in 2 hours, my henchman will kill you. Shouldn't be a problem. Your cousin tells me you're an excellent shooter.
TJ sent me his address. My target is a 15-minute drive away. Part of me wanted to commit suicide right then and there, but I knew I would be viewed as chickening out, and that would surely get Lacey killed. No, I had to do this. I took a quick shower, then went out to my apartment building's parking garage, taking my laptop with me. I opened up the toolbox in the bed of my pickup truck and pulled out my hunting rifle. I stared quietly at the weapon. I brought it with me when I drove out to California 2 years ago. I had used it many times for hog hunting, but I hadn't had much time for hunting much of anything since moving here. However, I had cleaned it recently, and I had plenty of ammunition. I tossed the rifle into the back seat of my truck. "Put this on," I heard a voice say. Startled, I turned around and saw a tall man in a hooded sweatshirt wearing a skull mask. "Let me guess, you're that psychopath's puppet," I said sarcastically. "Put this on," he repeated in a more aggressive tone. He was holding a headset in his outstretched hand. I took it from him. "This headset has a small camera planted inside. It will provide visual information that you have carried out your task. Any attempt to tamper with it, and I will kill you." They had all their bases covered. Such a lovely crowd to hang out with, I said as I climbed into my truck. I saw him turn around and walk away. I couldn't see him or his vehicle anywhere in sight. With that, I started the ignition and began to drive to the address TJ had sent me. All the while, I saw a dark SUV with tinted windows tailing me the whole way. I tried to make out a license plate, but it was late at night, and I couldn't see it. I eventually arrived at the street where my intended target lived. His house was directly across the street from a park. I decided it would be easier to hide from my target if I parked my truck over there. Meanwhile, the SUV that had been tailing me made a sharp U-turn and parked itself on the other side of the street. They weren't kidding that he was watching my every move. I opened up my laptop and waited for a video box to appear on the desktop, which is how TJ said he would contact me when they neared the end of their disgusting little show. At about 1:20 a.m., that's exactly what happened.
Welcome back again, loyal viewers. We have had quite an entertaining show so far tonight. We've got quite a finale in store for you.
He went off camera and dragged a woman in front of it, hands tied and mouth covered in duct tape. It was Lacey.
Will a man end one person's life to possibly save another? Let's find out. Off to Los Angeles we go.
In the video box, the image of TJ was replaced with the camera feed from the headset his henchman had tried to give me earlier. I knew this was my cue to look over at my target's house across the street. I rolled my window down low enough for the muzzle to stick out. TJ's henchman got out of his SUV and walked up the driveway. Apparently the man I was assigned to kill was a night owl. All the lights in his house were on, and I swore I could hear his TV blaring. Maybe he lived alone. The masked man rang the doorbell and stepped off to the side of the house to hide. A man arrived at the door.
Hello? Who's there?
He took a couple steps outside. This was it, my moment of truth. I gathered every ounce of strength and fortitude I could muster and pulled the trigger. It was a direct hit right between the eyes. Raymond Marshall was dead before he hit the ground. The henchman emerged from the side of the house and walked up to the corpse and examined it. After doing so, he looked in my direction and gave some kind of hand gesture, presumably a signal of verification.
Well, there you have it. Our friend did indeed have it in him to commit this murder. Since I am in a generous mood, I will not kill his cousin.
I heard TJ say on my laptop. The henchman got back into his SUV and drove off into the night. I watched as he drove away. I breathed a sigh of relief, but that relief was short-lived. I saw TJ walk off camera, and another one of his cronies walked into view, armed with a shotgun. After a slight hesitation, he shot Lacey dead. I was in utter shock and disbelief, even though I had done exactly what this monster had ordered me to do, and my cousin was still murdered. I had committed an act I found to be reprehensible, and it was all for nothing. I spent the next 2 days sobbing in despair in my bedroom. My uncle called and told me that he and my aunt had filed a missing persons report. They had tried to contact Lacey for several days, but couldn't get a hold of her. I feigned ignorance about what happened because I just couldn't bring myself to tell them. I lay in my bed, pondering what to do next. Those bastards had to be punished. But how? After all, one doesn't maintain a murder show on the dark web without being masterful at covering their tracks. But even the most careful criminals slip up eventually. Then I remembered something. The headset I had worn that night. The one with the camera installed. Could it possibly still have footage on it? Maybe not. They probably deleted it by now. But I decided it was worth a shot. It's not like I had any other options. I hadn't taken computer lessons in a while, but I remember the basic hacking tricks Lacey had taught me. I put the headset next to my laptop and went to work. It was a pain in the ass, but after several hours, I finally figured out how to hack into the camera. I expected to see nothing but a black screen, but to my surprise, I discovered a memory file in the camera. I clicked the file, and yes, footage from the murder. They had slipped up and forgotten to delete the memory. But that was only the starting point. I needed more if I was going to track him down. The henchman had his mask on the whole time, making it damn near impossible to identify him. The video reached the point where the henchman drove off, and I noticed something. There was a short moment where the vehicle passed under a bright street lamp before disappearing into the darkness. I saw a license plate, but the image quality was too blurry. I hacked in a little more to see if I could clear up the resolution, and it worked. The picture was now clear. It was a Nevada license plate. I was one step closer. I typed the plate number into the database. The vehicle was a 2002 Toyota 4Runner, registered to a man named Zachary Parker of Reno, Nevada, about a 7-hour drive north. I was also able to acquire his address, and I was now on the trail of my cousin's killers. You're going down, TJ. I'll make sure of that, even if it kills me. I packed food, rope, and duct tape, as well as a handgun that I used for home defense, and a hunting knife that I had brought with me when I moved out here. Before departing LA, I stopped at a local store to pick up mace and a taser gun. I was loaded and prepared to exact revenge against these psychopaths. I told my roommates that I was taking a short trip and that I'd be back in a few days, but truthfully, I had no idea if I would be coming back at all. These were some bad characters I was dealing with. I was expecting to lose my own life, but if I brought them down in the process, it would be worth it. I would prevent further deaths and avenge Lacey. I departed at about noon, but heavy traffic added another hour to my trip. I reached Reno at around 10 o'clock at night. Since I lacked familiarity with the area, it took me another hour to find the address of the SUV driver. Eventually, I arrived on a quiet street in a nice-looking neighborhood. It was a single-story, medium-sized house, similar in appearance to the one I had grown up in over in Texas. There it was in the driveway, the black Toyota 4Runner with that same license plate number. I was a nervous wreck, and it took me several deep breaths to calm myself down. Eventually, I worked up enough courage, grabbed my duffel bag, and stepped out of my truck. Slowly and quietly, I snuck up to the house, hoping against hope that nobody would notice me. Suddenly, the garage door began to open up. I ducked to the side of the house to keep myself out of sight. A man stepped out from the garage entrance and climbed into the SUV to start it up. But he wasn't going anywhere. He simply moved his vehicle into the garage before shutting it off. I heard the sound of the vehicle door open and shut again. This is where I took my chance. I bolted from my hiding spot and snuck into the garage at the corner, using the SUV as concealment. The man didn't notice me. He reclosed the garage door, shut off the lights, and walked back into the house. I stayed crouched in the corner for another half hour, believing he might be going to bed soon since it was late at night. Eventually, I made it to the door leading into the garage and opened it as quietly as I could. I had entered the laundry room and there was another door, which I also opened. I was now in a dark hallway. At the end was a bedroom with its door partially open and the light on. I heard the sound of a shower shutting off. A few minutes later, I heard gargling noises. These were the longest few minutes of my life as I waited for the right moment to strike. I slowly crept down the dark hallway, careful not to make a sound. I set down the duffel bag and pulled out my taser. I heard a slight creaking noise of the man sitting down on his bed. That's when I made my move. I burst through the bedroom door and shot the man in the chest with the taser gun. I made sure he was electrocuted for a good, long time because I wanted him to suffer. Plus, I wanted to ensure that he wouldn't be able to fight back when I used the rope to bind him to his bedroom chair. Some time passed and he recovered from his disorientation. It took him a moment to realize he was tied up, and he began shaking frantically. Then he looked up at me and let out a gasp. What the hell are you doing here? How the fuck did you find me? You got sloppy, I said tersely. Bet you never thought you'd see me again, did you? He glared at me contemptuously. Names and locations, dickface. I'm not telling you shit, he said defiantly. Fine, I got plenty of time. In the meantime, we're going to see just how much you can take. See how tough you really are. He gulped nervously. We can do this the easy way, or the hard way, Zachary. Names! Go fuck yourself, he shouted. I pulled out my handgun and shot him in his kneecap. He screamed like a banshee, and I couldn't help but feel satisfaction at watching him suffer. Not so tough when your victims fight back, are you? Start talking, asshole. Go to hell. Maybe I will, but I'm taking you bastards down with me. I then pulled out my pepper spray and blasted him squarely in the face, which led to more screaming. I made sure he got a large dosage. His eyes watered like a faucet, and mucus began dripping out his nose. Talk. You're getting nothing from me. Alright then. Looks like I need to up the ante. I reached once more into the duffel bag and pulled out the hunting knife. Let's see. Your fingers, your toes, or your family jewels. He stared at me silently, sweating profusely. I'll settle with the family jewels. I moved in closer and began to press the knife against his crotch. All right, I'll talk. I pulled back and smiled with satisfaction. That's more like it. He spilled the beans on the names and addresses of every one of his co-workers. He even gave the address of the abandoned warehouse where they hold their live streams. He said they were planning to have another show tomorrow night. As much as I hated this man, I didn't actually want to kill him. I would have preferred Zachary and his buddies to be kept alive to suffer in prison forever, but I also couldn't take the chance that he would break free and would warn his friends that I was trailing them. I pressed the gun to his temple and pulled the trigger. A loud bang rang out, and I saw his head slump, oozing blood and brain matter onto the carpet. I stood there for a moment, watching Zachary's limp corpse. It was a lot for me to take in. Yes, he deserved it. I doubt anyone would argue otherwise. Still, this was the first time I had ever willingly taken a human life, and I felt a little overwhelmed. But I had to expunge that feeling. I couldn't afford to be a bleeding heart, not with these bastards, and I would have to be prepared to take more lives if necessary. Just then, I heard a whimpering noise. It was coming from Zachary's closet. I pressed my ear against the door and could hear what sounded like children crying. It was a heartbreaking sound. "Has this man been keeping you hostage?" I asked.
Yes.
I heard the voice of a young boy respond from the other side of the door. "Don't worry, I'm gonna get you help." I looked around Zachary's bedroom and saw his cell phone on top of his nightstand. I used his cell phone to contact the police and inform them of the children being held captive. Eventually, I drove away from the house, discreetly in the dead of night. Somehow, none of his neighbors heard anything. I spent the better part of the following day staking out the abandoned warehouse Zachary told me about. I couldn't keep my mind focused on anything else except bringing these bastards down. Eventually, the sun began to set, and I decided to make a move on the factory, whether TJ and his cronies had arrived or not. My truck was hidden in some bushes behind the building, so I was confident they wouldn't spot it. I took the rear entrance, hoping it would draw less attention. I had my sniper rifle, a flashlight, hunting knife, and taser with me. If what I had seen from the live stream was any indication, they always came armed. I opened the back door slowly, but it still creaked loudly. I tried to maintain my bravado, but that creaking noise made me fear I had alerted them to my presence. I chose to press forward despite my fears, my rifle pointed in front of me at all times. The factory was dim and quiet. Every little noise I heard made me shiver, but I wasn't going to turn back now. I had come too far down the tracks to abort at this point. There was a musty smell in the air, but it soon gave way to the smell of death. I recognized it instantly. Spend as much time hunting wild hogs as I have, and you become very familiar with the smell of decaying flesh. I traced the stench to a door at the end of a hallway. I opened it up and shined my flashlight into a pitch-black room, sweeping the beam across a pile of dead bodies, some of whom were children. I then shone the light to the other side of the room and saw 3 people bound and gagged in a corner, a man and 2 women. Using my hunting knife, I cut the ropes binding them.
Are you a cop?
Asked one of the female captives. "No, I'm just here to help," I replied. Then I pointed at the dead bodies. "Last night's victims? Yeah, they haven't gotten around to burying them yet. They're running some kind of sick internet show here, and we were next in line," said the male captive. The other female hostage was too traumatized to speak. I can't say I blame her. "You 3 get on out of here and head for the police station. We're shutting them down," I said. "You sure you'll be okay?" The male hostage asked. "I'll be fine, just don't tell them about me. Now go." Without missing a beat, the trio bolted out of there and out of the rear entrance. I decided to leave the door to this room open, just to give them a shock when they arrived. I reached the main area of the factory. It was largely empty aside from a few desks, a computer with a webcam, and some extension cords. I noticed a stepladder leading up to the catwalk above. I decided this would be a good place to hide while I continued to wait for their arrival. The wait would not be very long. Less than 10 minutes later, 4 men entered the building through the front door. They weren't wearing their masks, and they were all armed with shotguns, as expected. The leader was tall, lean, and had blonde hair. "Where the hell is Zachary? Have you been able to get a hold of him yet?" The blonde-haired man shouted in frustration. I quickly deduced this was TJ. "I've been trying to get a hold of him all day, but..." "But what?" "I drove by his house earlier today. The place was crawling with cops. When I asked a cop what happened, they said he was found dead in his bedroom. Maybe someone found out about all the kids he was holding captive." TJ let out an exasperated sigh. Fine, we'll just have to do it without him. I should have known bringing him on board was a mistake. He always was a little careless. Oh, you have no idea, TJ. I quietly muttered to myself from my hiding spot. TJ approached the desk with the computer and turned it on. Bring out those 3 hostages. We'll begin tonight's show in about half an hour. You got it, boss. One of the other men said as he disappeared down the hallway. I readied my hunting rifle from my perch on the catwalk. The moment of confrontation was arriving. TJ fiddled around on the computer for a bit when he suddenly heard a loud scream. What the fuck was that? TJ said. The henchman reappeared, looking frantic and sweating. The hostages, they're gone. What do you mean, they're gone? TJ asked incredulously. They're gone. The storage room door was wide open. I walked in and they weren't there. The ropes had been cut. I saw TJ put his head in his hands. How the fuck did... Never mind. If those people somehow escaped, they're bringing the cops back here with them. We'd better leave now. I wasn't going to give them that chance. I aimed the rifle at the henchman's chest and fired. He yelped in pain and dropped to the floor. TJ and his 2 remaining accomplices began frantically looking around, hoping to find the person who shot their friend. One of them walked directly in front of my sightline, and I had a clear shot at the back of his head. I fired and watched his head split open as he fell dead to the floor. Now it was down to 2. The last of TJ's cronies rushed to his friend's side, and I blasted him in the right knee before shooting him once more in the head. But this victory was short-lived. I heard a gunshot ricochet behind me. TJ had spotted me. I got up and ran as fast as I could across the catwalk. I heard another gunshot, then another. He pumped the shotgun once more, but I heard a clicking noise when he pulled the trigger. Using this opportunity, I shot TJ twice in his left leg, and he was down like the rest of them. I climbed down from the nearest ladder to get back to floor level. TJ was groaning in pain and holding onto his leg. I decided to give him a little more fun as I approached him. I fired another round, this time into his shoulder. I took out the hunting rifle and made an underhand toss. It landed to his right leg. Finally, I tased the bastard and made him squirm and flop like a fish on dry land. Oh, how the mighty have fallen, I said smugly. Once TJ regained his composure, he looked up at me. Hey, you! Surprised to see me, you son of a bitch. But how did you... Wait, don't tell me Zachary. Like you said, he was always a little careless, and this time it came back to bite you in the ass. You were the one that killed him. He got what he deserved. All right, but what about Raymond Marshall's murder? You'll still go to prison for that. No, I won't. Oh, really? And what makes you say that? Because you aren't going to say anything. I pointed the muzzle at his forehead. No, please, spare me. He sounded so pathetic. I saw a puddle form near his crotch. The bastard was pissing himself in fear. Spare you? Did you spare my cousin? Did you spare anyone who pleaded for mercy? No, you give no mercy, you shall receive no mercy. I pulled the trigger and ended his life. All of them were dead now. The nightmare was over. I heard sirens approaching off in the distance. I quietly exited the factory and returned to my stakeout spot. I spent the next few hours in my truck, watching the cops tape off the facility and coroners removing the corpses of TJ and his cronies. More arrived in hazmat suits to remove the dead bodies I had seen in the storage room. Eventually, they sent digging crews to excavate the remains of the victims they had buried. It was during all this commotion that I was able to drive away unnoticed. It was a very long drive back to LA. I spent some of that time listening to the radio. The story was all over the news. When I heard reports about the men being eliminated by a, quote, unknown assailant with no available description, end quote, I knew the 3 hostages I'd cut loose had kept their promise. I was in the clear. Eventually, Lacey's remains were identified, and my aunt and uncle received some much-needed closure. It's been a long time since that incident. Occasionally, I have thought about turning myself in for Raymond Marshall's death, but I always rationalized that his death was on their hands and that I was an unwilling pawn. Take it from me. The deep web is a dark, despicable place. I will never go there again. And neither should you.